All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, again, welcome to those of you who have just joined us to today's webinar, Governing Capital Delivery in a Post-Microsoft Project Online World, hosted by Broadpin. So who is Broadpin? We bring together top Oracle experts to deliver deep project-focused solutions for customers across a wide variety of industries. So some of you may remember us by Project Partners, Quistor, Primatis, or Pitts. I'm Kristen Kirkendall, Director of Marketing for Broadpin North America, and I'll be your host today. I'm excited to be joined by our experts, my colleague Chris Hallwig, and it seems that Garrett might be running just a tad bit late, but he should be joining us shortly. So as many of us know, Project Online will reach the end of life on September 30th, 2026. So for organizations still running on it, is critical. This right now is really a critical decision point, and doing nothing is no longer an option for us. So the real question is, do we simply replace it, or do you use this moment to rethink how capital programs are governed and delivered? So we're going to really dig into that today. And just to set expectations for today, this is not a product demo. This is truly a discussion. So we want this to be as interactive as possible. So I believe on your right-hand side, you should see a chat box where you can drop in your questions. So please use that to add your questions, and we'll cover as many as possible during the Q&A. Chris, would you like to add anything before we get started?
No, we're good to go. Let's go.
Great. Okay. So just quickly setting the stage, right? So let's start with the announcement itself. What does Microsoft's retirement of Project Online mean for owners really practically and strategically?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think, practically, as you kind of already alluded to it a little bit, but I think it's, it really is a point where it's forcing owners to make a decision, right? Instead of postponing one at this point, right? So we've already seen a lot of organizations were already supplementing, Project Online with spreadsheets and other manual controls and things like that. So some of the shortcomings we're starting to be seen. And I think this retirement announcement just moves you out of that, comfort zone of, what we've got is good enough. And just starts to create a clear transition window, right? Now is the time to be taking a look at, what are you really doing? And is this an opportunity to really rethink what we're looking at, right? So, practically, you're at a point where you really need to make a decision. Strategically, I think it's just kind of a rare opportunity to kind of modernize your capital governance, right? So, instead of just kind of replicating, past limitations or, you're at a point where you can adopt, platforms that support more program level oversight, auditability, predictive insights, not just the task tracking that we've seen a lot of the tools of the past provide, right? So I think it's a clear opportunity to rethink, how you're going about this and what you may want to move and mature your way into moving forward.
Right. And so from your perspective, why are so many owners reevaluating not just the tool itself, but the operating model for capital program delivery?
Yeah, I think, we've seen over time, like, a lot of owners realize that, the systems that they had really kind of shaped the behavior, right? So if the tool was focused, on kind of tasks and organizational, the organization became focused on tasks, right? So now, we're seeing a lot of leadership, rethinking that and asking, are we really managing activity? Or are we governing outcomes, right? So, it's a time to kind of rethink what you're doing there. And then as these programs, everything is getting larger, more regulated, there's more visibility into, to what's out there. And that pressure is gonna really, expose the weaknesses that you're going to see in any kind of informal reporting structures. And it's going to force you to rethink kind of your governance maturity, right? So, it's just a time to, that we're seeing a lot of owners really reevaluate how they're going about their capital programs.
Right. So I think strategically, it's really forcing organizations into a broader debate on how they really want to wrap their arms around it. And right, this isn't a bad thing. And to service, oh, excuse me, let me disconnect my phone here. It looks like I'm running into some There we go. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. It's always the debate between the light side and the dark side, right? I'm always on Apple, but everybody else is on Android. So what I was saying is, how we might want to service and scale, or they might want to service and scale their project, program, and portfolio management users, and data really need to just meet their goals, right? So on the engineering and construction work that they do. So I think this is a really good time to reevaluate. So
Right.
moving on to what did MS Project do and didn't do? So clearly it played an important role for many organizations. What did it do well for project teams?
Yeah, I think it made scheduling and collaboration accessible, right? So, teams could coordinate their work, share plans. They integrated well, right, with obviously familiar Microsoft tools that we're all familiar with. And for smaller portfolios, internal initiatives, things like that, it probably provided enough structure without too much heavy configuration. And that just made the adoption of it very, very simple and straightforward. But it also exposed some issues with, this industry in particular.
Right. Right. And I think our conversations with Garrett, what I understood is it's really important to understand that the construction and engineering projects are fundamentally unique types of work, and defining project management and its subsets of capability areas like planning and scheduling, and or as a lateral horizontal function that happens across an organization is all the same way, regardless really of the project type.
Right.
It just really isn't true. So engineering construction projects are really different, and we have to really rethink of how we've seen owners, regardless of what critical assets or infrastructure they're making, is that capital programs really need specialized focus from their providers. And that understands the business problems of engineers and builders, and they break in the industry best practices that accompany the way they. So, following into that, some of the limitations that Microsoft Project Online had, especially for owners, what were the most significant gaps that you saw over the years, particularly around governance, risk, and portfolio management?
Yeah, we're losing your voice there a little bit too, Kristen. Yeah, so yeah, some of the gaps that, as you mentioned, right, around the governance and risk and portfolio management. I think again, one of the key things there was that it really lacked that enforcement standards that owners really need, right, and to kind of run these programs. Schedule consistency, contractor submissions, baselines often depend on manual oversight rather than kind of system controls, right? So these are some of the risks and just kind of gaps that we saw on top of what you mentioned earlier, right? Just more industry focused around the workflows that we generally engage in on these engineering and construction projects. And project just really didn't fit that mode. Risk analysis, portfolio roll-ups, it's just not native strengths of Project Online, right? And so what we saw was just really a lot of organizations frequently relying now on exports of information, spreadsheets, right? Third-party reporting layers, things like that to get that executive visibility into this. But it's very much a reactive model, right? It wasn't very predictive in nature.
Right. And so, in your opinion, did teams using Project Online find it harder to collaborate as their capital portfolios grew or became more regulated? What made it challenging?
Yeah, I think as you expand your portfolios and you get into more stuff, right? All the inconsistencies and lack of standards really start to show, right? So the way you go about coding information, or just even simple things like consistency in calendars, right? All these different things just create challenges in rolling up information And so data integrity starts to become just a reoccurring challenge, right? So, in regulated environments, limited audit, workflows, traceability, right? That really increases exposure, particularly around like things like claims and schedule disputes, even funding accountability, right? These are all the holes that start to get exposed, right? As you're kind of working with these, really non-industry specific, tool sets and concepts.
Right. And so as capital projects are larger, they've really become more complex, and it exposes vulnerabilities regardless of the vendors that are there to support the project. So the question, I think, really is less about denying like what has happened, and more about how we're able to architect and both service the data and the user needs for the enterprise.
Right.
And the approach that at least Oracle, from my opinion, takes has always been an industry-focused enterprise solution that supports capital projects. So moving on really quick, just for the audience here, I'd love to get some of your feedback. I'm going to go ahead and submit a poll here. We would like to understand what tools you're currently utilizing for project governance. I know many of us on the call may be utilizing Microsoft Project, but if you are here to learn a little bit more about OPC and you're using a different tool, please go ahead and submit your vote so we can just gain a little bit more insight. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds really to fit this poll. Okay. Let's see. Great. So it looks like about 70% of us are using Primavera, one Microsoft project, and then a few, like 10%, 20% utilizing a combination of Microsoft Project and online. So let's now take this conversation into the shift from tracking into governance. So
Sure.
in our previous conversations that we've had, leading up to this event, we've said that tracking activity is no longer enough. So can you explain what distinguishes task tracking from capital program governance?
Yeah, task tracking is just that, right? We're measuring activity, right? We're looking at things like percent completes, due dates, assignments, right? And governance really is more about measuring exposure, right? So risk, baseline integrity, forecast confidence, right? So to your earlier point, this is more about looking forward and understanding where we're going and outcomes versus really just focused on kind of what's taken place, right? And that kind of task tracking mentality. And the idea of the governance really is to introduce structure, right, into what you're doing, right? Defining those standards, what approval workflows need to be put in place, what kind of program level visibility needs to be there that helps you align your projects to your enterprise objectives, right? So the focus really needs to kind of shift to are we looking at outcomes, or are we looking at activity, right? So I think it's a little bit of a different mindset, and again, we've got to have our focus on the outcome of these programs and what we're trying to deliver.
Right. And so as we are talking about this, why is this shift really becoming so important now, especially for public agencies, utilities, and other regulated owners?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, on the public side, certainly agencies are going to be facing further and deeper funding scrutiny, right, and compliance mandates, right. So are we, what is the public getting for their money, and again, from a regulatory perspective, compliance is huge. On the private side, owners are going to face investor and stakeholder pressure, right, for the same kind of predictability about what's going on. And then the cost of reactive management is rising, right? So organizations are going to have that early warning indicators, not after the fact, explanations of why we're behind or why we over budget, right? So that shift really needs to move towards, again, that kind of, focus on predictive outcomes.
Yeah. So speaking of identification and the shift, right? What are the top signs that tell an organization that they've outgrown the traditional project tracking tool that they've been utilizing?
Yeah, well, that's usually where we run into, right, the most popular project management tool in the world, right? Microsoft Excel, right? So spreadsheets is really the answer to
Yeah.
that. That's a very clear indicator to us, and especially in kind of the space that we play. When we see a heavy dependency on kind of, spreadsheets, that just to get it, that executive reporting or cross project visibility, right? We're taking data outside of the systems that we may be using and trying to cobble it back together in some fashion that makes sense, right? So that's one thing, right? And then we're just seeing a lot of management is really kind of questioning, can we trust that data now, right? And so forth. And what's our confidence level, right? And they're just not getting clear answers from that kind of process. So it just leads to a lot of questions and uncertainty about what's taking place.
Right. And I think also too, the concept of all construction projects ultimately matter. And owners need to ask the question of, do I have one solution managing small, simple projects and another for managing large, complex projects? And I think that's very common from my understanding in our conversations. That's very common in the industry. So, and it's obviously not ideal. We want everything on a unified single structure or platform.
Right.
So wanting one solution to handle anything. So yeah, I think that's a very important item to recognize. So
yeah, I mean, I think that's critical, right? Because you can't have these one-offs, right? And different tool sets for different levels of complexity, right? So getting everything into that one enterprise container and having a system that allows you to kind of, look at things, whether it's small, to a massive mega program, right? We got to have the ability to kind of track and manage both of those.
And I think too, as we start to think about the complexity of vendors that are associated with these large capital projects, how many tools is everyone in the bucket utilizing? So simplifying and allowing users to access one tool for a project really lets users mature or level up without having to silo the information in different areas. I think we have a question coming through. We are going to get to that question in just a moment. So speaking of tools, why organizations are choosing Oracle Primavera Cloud. So OPC really isn't positioned, we're not positioning it as a replacement for Project Online, right? But it's a different model entirely. So what is the biggest mindset shift that owners need to take or understand about OPC?
Yeah, so the OPC really isn't about doing the same work in a new interface, right? It's really about formalizing governance and kind of elevating how capital delivery is really controlled, right? So it's really about more of a I'd say, a shift from, passively collecting, updates and the typical process that we did to, actively setting standards and kind of driving and enforcing consistency right across your program. So I think that's the biggest, initial mind shift, right, about what OPC really is.
And I think another area too that we really need to, make clear is that OPC is not P6, right? It's not P6 on the cloud either. And, P6 has been around forever and it's not going anywhere. But it's it's a solution. OPC is a solution that's perfect for capital project and programs for really any size and complexity, right?
Yeah, and I think like one of the key things about it as well is right is or to say misconception, right, is that you need that kind of P6 level of knowledge right on day one, and you really don't, right? OPC is really there from day one, the ability to kind of get on board and begin to kind of level up your capability, but it's also there for day 365 and year 5, right, and so forth. So your ability to kind of scale into it is really a big difference about OPC.
Right. So speaking of capital programs, OPC is really specifically built for this area, right? So what does
Right.
what does that translate in terms of practical capabilities or outcomes?
Um, yeah, so I mean, obviously it'll support, complex, logic driven schedules, long durations, multiple contractors, right? It just does that in a much easier fashion than I think P6 ever did, right? Integrating, kind of next level, right? We're integrating things like risk. Obviously baseline management's always been there kind of in P6, but approvals, just the ability to kind of manage portfolios and roll up information natively and kind of eliminating all these fragmented kind of disparate systems and reporting mechanisms and so forth, right? We're bringing everything into kind of that one enterprise container, if you will, and just making it easier for the organization to, operate right in kind of that single source of truth, if you will, and all the players involved in that environment as well.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of some of the larger capabilities that OPC provides, how does OPC give owners more control without requiring the micromanagement or really the Primavera expertise from, let's just say, day one?
Yeah, I mean, you're really faced with kind of, you're defining a framework kind of one time, right? So you're going to go through and think your way through how you want these programs and so forth to, to function and what kind of information and insights are you looking to get out of it. So you're going to put in place kind of those, the WBS structures, right? And coding standards and, calendars, all that kind of stuff that kind of drive data integrity. And then the system is what's ultimately enforcing those things naturally, right? So it's not a a person heavy, kind of system where you have to get in there and kind of control every last little bit of detail to make sure that the information's correct, right? And coming from years of P6 use myself and all that, right? All the planners and schedulers are like, don't touch my data, right? Because they're too worried about what might happen to it and so forth, right? We want to shift away from that, right? And open that up, and just knowing that the standards and the controls are there for the system to help you manage and control that, I think is critical. And then just the ability to get rid of all that manual intervention, right? And just increasing transparency and accountability in the system, right? As opposed to trying to make that or enforce that after the fact.
Right. And so just to add on really quick, how clean and intuitive is it, do you think, to get around OPC for users?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's a relatively intuitive platform from day one, right? That's why I said I think someone stepping into it from early on should be able to easily navigate their way around and just kind of get their rough idea of the platform and kind of what's going on with their projects. And then obviously as you mature your way into it, right, you can get into other aspects and things that we've discussed already, like risk management, et cetera, right? But from day one, it's really a much more intuitive platform than, not to pick on P6, and I love P6, but it's just a different tool for a different time.
Sure. Okay, we do actually have a question in here, if you'd like to take it. So, is self-hosting data from MSP in its own private environment rather than changing to a new system like OPC a viable solution?
Is hosting data from MSP in its own private rather than changing to a system. I mean, obviously you could certainly do that. I think you're gonna expose some of the same issues that we've talked about, right? Where um, the holes of governance are going to start to show, right, as you try to manage that, through MSP. Because again, the workflows just aren't there, and the concepts aren't there for this industry, right? It's a great tool for, kind of what it was built for, but as we've discussed already, it's not. It's just not a specific built tool for kind of the engineering construction space where we have very distinct processes and needs, right, that the industry requires. So
Right.
that's my 2 cents on it.
Great. Thank you. So we were talking about portfolio level visibility. So that's obviously been a consistent pain point for users. So how does OPC address that differently?
Yeah, so I think from the get-go, right, OPC is built for that, right? So it easily provides all that roll up of milestones, health indicators, trend analysis right across your projects. Your executives are able to more easily see emerging risk patterns and things like that. So instead of waiting for maybe an end of month or quarterly reconciliations of all the data, right, and all that stuff, we're spending it's still spending way too much time focused on the past on our projects and not about the future, right? So it's important for us to understand kind of how we performed and where we're at, but we need to really simplify the process of understanding that, and so we can shift more towards the other side of the fence, right, and looking at the future and what's going on, right, because this is where we can affect things and so forth. And so leadership really needs that information to flow up in a way that they can consume it, and I think that's where OPC really shines, right, and what it's really designed to do.
Sure. So my next question for you is, many organizations, from at least the conversations that we've had, worry about maturity levels. So how does OPC really support organizations, whether they're really early in their journey or they're pretty advanced?
Yeah, so I'd say early stage. You can look at things like just centralizing schedules and standardizing reporting first, right? So those are pretty straightforward things that you can get done very, very quickly. But then as you kind of mature forward, you can start getting into layering in, predictive risk modeling, portfolio and governance without really switching, too many of systems that you're bouncing around between today and all that, right? So we're bringing that all in house and giving you the ability to kind of mature your way up that tree and take advantage of some of the capabilities that are there. So that's why I said earlier, right? It's very simple to get on board on day one, but then as you master those things and the basics around the projects and the schedules and some of the data reporting, then we can start to move into more mature concepts, right? Like risk modeling and et cetera, right? And take advantage of those capabilities.
Yeah. Okay. So another exciting element that was just announced, I would say within the past month publicly, is that OPC has been listed as FedRAMP in process, which is really, really exciting for very large federal agencies who plan and execute that sort of high compliance projects. So what's the significance for public sector owners, do you think, for FedRAMP, this in
Well,
process?
yeah, I mean, obviously from Oracle's perspective, right, it's huge for them and getting the product, certified along those lines. Just opens the door, right, to a lot of different opportunities and programs. But I think, the key is that it's just going to, the alignment to kind of those federal security standards, it just strengthens trust for agencies that are trying to handle sensitive, infrastructure data, things like that are, critical. So, that you'll have the ability to meet those requirements. I think it also removes a little bit of a, kind of a procurement hesitation there, right? If you're looking at a platform like this and just kind of, that you can support that long-term visibility, especially for, public sector, environments.
Sure. Hey, Garrett.
Hey, Garrett. It's been an event playing around with getting into some of these things, but yeah. Anyway, you guys are all doing great. I've been able to hear some of this stuff. I'll help bring us home if we got some time.
Sure.
Great. Yeah, we actually were just now talking about OPC being listed as the FedRAMP in process. So if you wanted to expand on why that's significant for public sector owners.
All right. Well, just in time. So I'm glad we got here, and I've been looking forward to holding this kind of thing back, as listening to you guys go through some of this, but I've been getting through life. So let's chat about this and what this really means. Yes, OPC is now in process for FedRAMP authorization. Our sponsor is a very large federal agency who plans and executes sensitive, high compliance projects. And as a market signal, this is a major milestone. And not just for federal and state agencies who look to FedRAMP as an assurance of platform application or capability, but also as a security and a data protection posture to surround the work that they do. And this doesn't just impact owners. It's also a signal to the delivery teams who work with federal and state agencies that if they plan and pursue landing those contracts, that future-proofing their planning and scheduling practices with OPC is a growth position to extend their long-term relationships and their business value. So it's a massive announcement, and we're really looking forward to helping these state agencies and all the delivery teams get aligned to help out and get involved.
Thank you. Yeah, this is all very, very, very exciting news, I think, for the construction and engineering industry itself. So just literally transitioning without disruption. So for organizations looking to project online, what does a low disruption transition path look like for OPC?
Yeah, I think Nate had a question around this earlier too, as well, right? I think, the key here is as you take a look at transitioning into something like this, prioritizing kind of active projects and kind of future facing, governance rather than kind of looking at migrating every historical artifact that you may have, right? That just adds complexity that it provides very little value, right? So that's one of the things we always try to recommend. And that's really what Broadpin does and brings to the table here, right? Is we walk you through this process, right? In terms of how to, take a look at, implementing something like OPC. What's the best path to kind of walk you through that? Always looking at things like implementing in phases, right? Stabilizing certain things first, schedule governance, things like that are, as we talked about earlier, that are, rather straightforward, but important, right? Kind of important foundational things that need to be there before, some of those mature concepts that we talked about really matter. And then you can just, start to expand that into portfolio and risk, capabilities and things like that, right? So, we just recently had an energy infrastructure firm that has kind of gone through this. They were, somewhat using project, as we discussed earlier, for certain things, a lot of spreadsheets, as we discussed, reporting tools that kind of came in and try to mimic some of this, enterprise roll-up capabilities and so forth. And they transitioned from that is kind of a first phase into, as I mentioned, right, just getting in, getting that scheduling standardized, getting some of the coding schemes and just kind of standardization around reporting put in place. And that was kind of phase one. You're looking anywhere from 3 to 6 months maybe, right, to kind of roll your way into something like that. And now they're kind of in phase two, as they've kind of, standardized and kind of just stabilized a lot of that, and starting to look at things like risk management, right? So we're going through kind of a phase two at the moment. We're starting to introduce, what does that look like to you? What does that mean to you? How do we leverage, again, the capabilities of OPC, to kind of, again, simplify that, but also bring that extremely powerful capability, right, to what you're doing to manage these programs. So, it's different for everybody, right? But in general, we try to, phase your way into it. It's the old, kind of crawl, walk, run concept, right? So even if you're coming from a mature environment, but disparate tools, there's still a bit of a learning curve, right, that you need to go through to stabilize that into kind of that single source of truth platform that OPC really is. I don't know, Gary, you may have some additional comments.
Yeah, great explanation, Chris, and I'll just jump right on top of it. Look, change is hard for anyone.
Yeah.
But I think you can minimize disruption when you have a plan, and we have one. And the great part about OPC is that it can extend a customer's current state because we already know how to consume and play well with Microsoft. It doesn't have to feel like a rip and replace out of the gate.
Right.
So the same thing has also been true for our P6 users, interestingly enough, where we extend P6 with OPC on capabilities P6 doesn't have, things like what you mentioned, Chris, like the risk management, portfolio management, capital planning, task management around field production and control. And when the time is right, you can move everyone over. But that coexist phase, which can vary and might last a while, is a real thing. So we tailor it depending upon who you are, where you currently are, and what direction you ultimately want to go. But it's not hard to do. And we've seen a lot of customers make this move.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you. And from what I understand too, we've seen this happen. We've done this. We've seen this between MSP and the online or the OPC shift. So it's very exciting stuff. We do have about 4 minutes for questions, and we do have some come through. Let's see. How does OPC integrate with ERP systems, financial systems, or other scheduling tools?
You want to take that one first, Garrett?
Sure. Well, OPC is a great vehicle in that it plays nice with lots of different tools. So whether those integrations are things towards whatever your ERP system is, we've got a standard open API framework that makes it really easy to be able to connect Oracle Primavera Cloud into whatever financial system you have. Playing with additional scheduling tools, I think that's one of the interesting things about OPC in its current state, is it's great at being able to consume and import and export Microsoft information. So for those folks that are out there that might be still playing with MSP in a desktop version and need to be able to get that information, into a larger enterprise container, OPC is great at that. So we can handle formats and multiple formats from different providers or vendors. And you can utilize OPC as an enterprise container to kind of get your arms around all of that data, if it's important to you. I think that's been the aha for a lot of owners that we've worked with is how do I ultimately find something that lets me handle small, simple projects, large, complex projects, but do it in one system. And the same thing of seeing how do I deal with a solution that can handle beginners that are just getting started with planning and scheduling on their journey within project controls, and then all the way through experts. So what's the magic about OPC is that you can handle all of that. We've seen a lot of organizations take small project work and sort of migrate that over into OPC as a great starting point. And then Chris, like you said, maybe sunset some of their jobs over time, start new projects within it, let the other ones kind of fall out in whatever previous tool you might be using. It's unique to every customer. Everybody's a little bit different, but integration is not a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's very common in most. Sorry. The dog decided to have something to say about this. But yeah, I mean, it's very common in most implementations that we see, right? There's some form of integration to some system, usually to an ERP is definitely there, but it could be to as you mentioned, to other things. And again, the scheduling tools, those kinds of more industry focused things, those are easy, right? That's an easy lift, right? So yeah, from an integration perspective, I think OPC is positioned beautifully, right, to address the space.
Great. All right, I think we have time for one more question. And this is actually a great question, something that we talk about a lot here at Broadpin. So how are organizations managing the change management when adopting a new tool like OPC?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's always been a critical part of any of these kind of enterprise rollouts, right? As Garrett touched on it there a minute ago, right? You're introducing a change, right? And we're all reluctant to that. It's just kind of our human nature, right? So I think it's important to, as you look at any of these implementations, right, is to, assess that maturity level, right? Kind of meet people where they're at, right? Understand where we're at. How do we transition you to that, into that new model? Communication is going to be critical. Reinforcement, channels need to be identified, so, as we're getting into these territories and we've changed the process, we want to make sure that we've got, identified, sponsors within the organization that can help, drive that new process or that new procedure that you may have put in place. Just reinforcing why we're looking to do that. What does it ultimately mean for not only you as an individual, but how does it fit into the bigger picture, what the organization's trying to do? So I think it's, really managing the communication around that is critical. Always has been, right, on any of these kinds of implementations. So there's nothing new there. I just think that OPC, does, just from the way it's built, makes that just easier, right, to kind of go through and get people up to speed and running without, too much heartache, right, over what they had been doing. I don't know, Garrett, if you got any other thoughts on that.
I think it's well put. I would pretty much just wrap it up in two statements. I think a lot of people think making a transition to whatever tool you're on to new enterprise tools, especially when we talk about this within the realms of planning and scheduling, what we do around risk management, portfolio management, all that this is hard to do. And in our experience so far, it's not. When you have a good plan. So here's the good news. We've got a great plan, which I think is the true nature of meeting people where they are. Like, it's not so much the reasons why we might want to make those changes, but how we're going to do it. Right. We have that very thoroughly well mapped out. So do you have a plan? Is it something that you can help execute? Yes. And then the other thing that tends to fall behind it is, am I going to be the first one to try this? Like, am I just running out into some place where no one else has done this before? And the answer to that is no. You're not. So we've taken the learning of helping people make these transitions, and we've basically just continued to bake it in on updating, helping accelerate that for other folks that have also found an interest in that journey. And again, it's not a difficult thing to do. I think there's a lot of people invent complexity around this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
When you have a great plan, it tends to go easier. Just like any project you've ever worked on, you got a great plan, go execute that plan. So right. Yeah, hard to do. No. Are you the first one to do it? No. So, customers and the right. partners that we work with here, like, got a lot of experience of being able to help with these exact same scenarios. I think that's the good news.
Awesome. Well, we are officially out of time. So thank you all for joining us today. And, as you're really thinking about life beyond Microsoft Project Online, remember that you really just don't have to navigate this transition alone. So if you have any follow-up questions or want to learn more about Oracle Primavera Cloud, or really how Broadpin can help support your transformation, you can reach us at any time. Here I have the top left-hand corner ways you can get in contact with us. Email address, via the website, or even connect with us on LinkedIn. So again, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email us, and I'll be sure to get you in contact with the experts in our field to help address any additional conversations you'd like to have. So thank you to Chris, and thank you to Garrett for joining us today, and for everybody that came on the call. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.